Γεια σας και από μένα. Καλημέρα.
Hello, good morning from me. My name is Stavros Tsimas. I'm a journalist. I'm a professional journalist. I work for the Kathamerini Daily, and I'm in a very pleasant position to be moderating a very interesting discussion. You know, the role of a moderator in important fora tends to be hard. We'll need to respect the times allocated, and we will also need to interrupt speakers or give them warnings. But this is our role, this is our task on such panels, because we do not want to exhaust the audience. The time available for this session is 1.5 hours. And we need to spare some time for Q&A. So being the person in charge, let me begin, dear friends. This session is focused on the historical approach to the post-war era and the attempt to promote Christian values in politics in order to serve political objectives. How were the Christian values promoted and used following the Second World War in politics? Were Christian values instrumentalized by political authorities? How did we use the stock of faith? Point number 2. How do Christian values interact with political power, sometimes with the contribution of the ecclesiastical leadership? We see signs of nationalism, ethnic, racial approaches, particularly in the former Eastern Europe, the former communist countries, Russia and Ukraine, but also in other regions such as Africa. Christian value tends to become traditional values, and this is a deterioration. The evolution of this phenomenon is critical in the sense that, although apparently Christian or Orthodox, such values become part of state agendas. I need to say that having followed developments for 30 years in our neighborhood, where instrumentalization of religion is evident, so following for the past 30 years the dramatic developments in the Balkans and other countries of the former Eastern Bloc, I had the opportunity to witness firsthand such instrumentalization, particularly by Russia. You know it better than I do, but let me underline that religion and its institutional expression in the form of a church used to function and still functions as a channel for the expansion of geopolitical power and other interests. It may not have incited religious conflicts, but it did contribute to the reversal of political systems, and it did contribute to division between humans. It did not prevent wars or bloodsheds. The Vatican, Pope Wojtyla, undermined the communist system in Eastern Europe. In Poland, no doubt, the civil war in Yugoslavia with the bloodshed was not a religious war. It had a nationalist character, but Orthodox Catholics and Muslims slaughtered each other, wearing crosses or crescents with the blessings of local religious leaders. No important initiative was taken by the Church to put an end to this bloodshed. Each church gave its blessing to the arms of its own faithful so that they could kill people of other faiths. You can see what's going on in Ukraine right now in an expression of amorality. Patriarch Cyril did not try to prevent the invasion of Ukraine and the extermination of the Orthodox there. He followed, as Pope Francis said, as the little priest of Putin's, in the interest of whom he placed the Russian Church. The Muslim populations of the Balkans are also instrumentalized, or at least this is an attempt to do that, in the context of the Blue Homeland by Turkey. There's no need to give you more examples of the interaction between politics and religion. There are plenty on many levels. A comment on Greek reality nowadays, although this is a very low profile example. Parties and politicians attempt to have religion function in their own interests so that they can gain power. Childish, ridiculous approaches by certain leaders. In the name of votes, political leaders sell letters of Christ, quote unquote. The geopolitical situation is very complex, and in the name of the Church, there are politicians who attempt to get to power. This interesting conference is an opportunity to speak the truth, and as Thomas last Sunday, look for the truth in Christian values. Use this panel in order to explore how easy or difficult it is to build a constructive relationship between religion and politics in this maze-like reality. In one of your documents, you rightly point out that in our times, there's a deterioration of the concept of Christian value to the concept of traditional value, which refers to a politically dangerous situation that would place religious values under the protection of the state. One aspect has to do with nation and national identity as shaped during the past 2 centuries, and what its place is nowadays in the Western world, in Europe, particularly in light of recent global developments, armed conflicts and threats. Second question, Christianity, can it look for and find some common ground of understanding through a common scheme? Can there be a United Nations of Christianity over and above ideological differences? I hope that your appeal will be the seed of such cooperation. This is my final comment, and I will give the floor to Mr. Katranidis. Professor Kralidis, rather, who will be moderating the panel, because unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, I have to leave. Thank you, Mr. Dimas. Being one of the moderators of this first roundtable on this highly topical and interesting topic of on state and national interests and Christian values yesterday and today, would like to welcome all the attendees, and it is a great pleasure and a great privilege to have such a distinguished team of university professors, scholars, who will explore and investigate this complex issue. By way of introduction, I would like to say that this issue is not just deeply rooted in the historical tissue of Europe. It still continues to influence current political and social dynamics all over the continent. Christianity is the cornerstone of European identity, has been so for centuries, shaping its moral and ethical framework and affecting state policies. The interaction between state or national interests and Christian values has deeply affected the political, social, and moral landscape of our societies. Today, we shall attempt to explore historically how national interests were aligned with Christian values and how this relationship has evolved within the framework of the European Union. We'll try to have an in-depth discussion about this historical mosaic. Our discussion might touch upon a number of interesting issues. Historically, for instance, the role of Christianity in shaping the European identity, the relationship between church and state, and the concept of Christian world, the impact of reforms in Central and Eastern Europe on state power, formation of the modern European state, Christian values and how they affected modern nation states, the principle of national sovereignty, conservative policies in the European Union, modern contemporary influences, the impact of Christian values on human rights and migration policies in the European Union, the challenges to incorporate Christian values in secular pluralist societies, the influence of parties, particularly Christian democratic parties, on European policy. With regard to the balance between secularization and religious values, the role of religious symbols in public places, the debate about civil liberties and state neutrality, or case studies from a number of EU member states that reflect such tensions. We have with us today specialists, researchers, as well as politicians that will share with us their ideas and perspectives. We will ask every panelist a first introductory remark that will pave the way for our debate, and then we'll open the floor to a more dynamic and interactive dialogue. We encourage every participant to share their views with us by asking questions, thus leading us to an enriching exchange. Allow me to point out that this round table is an opportunity for open dialogue and expression of mutual respect. The various opinions that will be voiced here today are proof of the complexity of the issues that we're debating, and the discussion that will follow hopefully enable us to put forth new proposals that can be immediately be implemented in future. Without further ado, let me hand over to our first speaker, Professor Emmanuel Karagiorgoudis, Dean of the National Capodistria University of Athens, Faculty of Theology, to share a brief introductory remark with us. Thank you, Chairman. It is a great honor and pleasure to be among you today to talk about an issue of a deep historical yet very topical character and nature, i.e. the evolution of Christian values and state policies in the post-war times. The period under consideration is characterized by a complex interaction between religion, faith, and power, whereby Christian values were instrumentalized in order to serve political agendas. Following World War II, there was a radical change in the global landscape. States tried to rebuild themselves, not just morally, but also physically. Christian values, peace, justice, charity, offered an attractive framework for such a restructuring, such a rebuilding. Yet, there are ulterior motives between those values meeting state interests. The Christian Democratic Party in Italy became dominant by combining Catholic social teachings with a political strategy to deal with communism. Christian values there were used not just moral compasses, but also as ideological weapons for ideological hegemony. The Orthodox Church in Greece, in a similar way, had a dominant role in shaping a post-war national identity. The alignment between church and state was considered necessary in order to preserve traditional cultural heritage and social cohesion. However, this also meant that Christian values were subdued to nationalistic objectives, thus weakening their spiritual purity. If we turn to the Soviet Union, we can see a complex relationship between state and religion. Despite the officially atheistic attitude of the communist regime during World War II, Stalin temporarily relaxed restrictions on Orthodox Church, recognizing its potential to strengthen patriotism and unity among Soviet citizens. This use of the church during the Great Patriotic War demonstrates that sacrifice and resistance, Christian values in other words, were used in order to serve the state's existential struggle. After the war, the regime turned back to its previous policy. In Latin America, the theology of emancipation became a powerful movement that combined Christian teachings with an appeal for social justice and activism. Here, Christian values questioned directly the oppressive regimes, demonstrating a dynamic interaction, a framework in which faith inspired political resistance and tried to reshape social structures. Let's go moving on to our times. In Eastern Europe in particular, we witness a rekindling of religious nationalism. In Russia, for instance, the Orthodox Church has become a constant ally of the state through policies that combine traditional Orthodox values and a strong nationalistic narrative. This shift from Christian values towards local traditional values is challenging. It risks secularizing what is sacred. It risks turning faith into a political instrument. In today's geopolitical environment characterized by revisionist ideologies, Christian values are promoted in order to underpin xenophobic policies. We have seen that in Greece as well. The teaching of Christ, love, charity, humility, is overshadowed by political stratagems. This phenomenon undermines the foundations of Christian values themselves. It deteriorates faith, turns it into a vehicle that will move forward political agendas. We need to take a critical stance to that and acknowledge that the genuine expression of Christian values should supersede political or national borders. In conclusion, the post-war evolution of Christian values reveals a multifaceted narrative. It's a history of hope and compromise, spiritual guidance, and political strategy. In the complex modern world, it is imperative for us to try and preserve the integrity of Christian values, ensuring that they are used as a pillar of genuine spiritual guidance and are not exploited for political or state purposes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'll give the floor to Professor Stylianos Tsoumbanidis, colleague at the Faculty of Theology of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Thank you very much. Christos Anesti, God is risen. And now I shall connect what I said to the first moderator who spoke about the United Nations of Christianity. I should talk to you about the Global Council of Churches and also about the Conference of European Churches and how these have been used in Western and Eastern Europe. The title for Western Europe could be A Political Faith at Service of Politics, and in Eastern Europe after World War II, Peace as a Weapon during the Cold War. After World War II, that was fed on dangerous ideologies, racism, and economic interests, we went from a vision for a new peaceful world that fed both the ecumenical movement and the Global Council of Churches and modern Europe. The Global Council of Churches, together with the Conference of European Churches, are examples of transnational religious and non-governmental organizations that were active on a broad range of topics related to human rights, peace, disarmament, economic and social development, and the foundations for the political ethics in the world. These activities, however, came up against various forms of resistance inside the church and inside states. And we need to note two particular issues. First, that the ecumenical movement was put forward by powers of global politics, particularly the North Atlantic Alliance, that did not want the churches divided and wanted to use them as a break against the Soviet bloc and communism. Secondly, a lot of churches and Christians, particularly of the powerful states of the North, put forward the argument that is also at the same time a political position that the church and Christians should not be involved in political and social issues, and that the mission of the church is purely spiritual. In this way, as we understand Christian values, in order for Christian values to serve the interests of the status quo, became a form of urban Christianity which puts forward an apolitical faith based on the security of the private sphere, without showing interest for the broader society. Conservative parties in Europe, in some countries, considered churches as a type, as something that they owned, and the idea of an apolitical church was used to cover over negative political interests, connecting the church to a dominant political ideology by adapting the Bible to its own measures rather than the other way around. Peace now as a weapon during the Cold War. On the other hand, in the Soviet Union, the struggle for peace was a cornerstone of its foreign policy. The message of peace that we all know comes from the essence of Christian faith and is identified with it during the Cold War would become a core weapon of Soviet policy. After 1948, the Orthodox Church of Russia, that had participated very selflessly in the Great Patriotic War against the Nazi invasion, gained its recognition from the state, and in a rekindling of Russian nationalism, a paradoxical alliance took form between the state and the Russian Orthodox Church, which led to the latter being used, and along with its influence, for the purposes of the foreign policies of the state, culminating with the promotion of peace. Just to show you a clear example, the Christian Conference for Peace in Prague in 1958, which was initially an independent entity of progressive Christian communities, was organized, controlled, and used as an instrument by Moscow through the Russian Orthodox Church in order to promote its international pacifist agenda. Also, the participation of the Russian Orthodox Church in the World Council of Churches from 1961 onwards, according to many historians, is part of a broader strategy of the Soviet Union. Peaceful coexistence, combating imperialism and social justice were presented as elements that were compatible with Christian values. This complex interaction between the World Council of Churches and the Russian Soviet Church within the framework of the Peace Conference was mutually beneficial and served the interests both of political and ecclesiastical circles. One of the main objectives through the use of the Russian Orthodox Church in the USSR was the creation of a beneficial and a favorable picture in countries that had a Christian majority, showing that it was a state that was tolerant to faith, trying to show that there was Christian liberty and that the church was an autonomous entity. In the participation in the World Council also offered an opportunity for an official diplomacy and exchange of views with the West that could be used in order to alleviate global tension. On the hand of the Russian Church now, the most important but not unique aspect of the support of Russian policy was the envisioning of the Church being a dominant force in the Orthodox world and being imposed as the longer Orthodox Church due to figures. And this goal, of course, was supported by the Soviet state. To conclude, I would like to make an observation related to the current context. That is something that my colleagues will also be talking about. After the outbreak of war in Ukraine, we see clearly in the same context the ideological instrumentalization of ecclesiastical faith by the state in order to support very narrow-minded nationalist interests and medievalist goals. Thank you very much.